3 years after my death, my deaf and blind grandmother accidentally dialed Ryan's number. Serena? You dare contact me with this number? Where have you been hiding and enjoying yourself these past 3 years? Was it you who leaked the operation route back then? Did Jay and the others die because of you? The sudden roar startled Grandma, causing her to almost drop the phone. She struggled to bring the receiver closer to her ear, explaining in a muddled, tearful voice. Hello? Is this Ryan? Serena is dead. She's not coming back. She was a good girl. Why are you still blaming her? The phone was abruptly hung up at that moment. The dial tone grated on my heart like a dull knife. Grandma held the old phone, her age-spotted hands trembling slightly, her cloudy eyes filled with confusion and helplessness. Bent over, she repeated again into the receiver, which had already ended the call. Ryan. Serena is dead. She really is dead. She was a good girl. Don't blame her. But on the other end, only a cold dial tone answered her. Ryan couldn't hear. Or rather, he didn't bother to listen. My name, which had haunted him for 3 years after my death, along with his hatred and accusations, and his so-called enjoying myself, and the accusation of leaking the operation route that led to Jay's death, were like red-hot iron nails, piercing my already lifeless heart full of holes. I'm dead. Ryan, I've been dead for 3 years. But you don't know. You actually thought I was alive, and had betrayed our former beliefs and comrades. The enormous sense of absurdity and sharp pain intertwined, causing even my residual soul to tremble violently. I wanted to explain, to rush to him and let him see what I am now, but I couldn't. I could only float beside Grandma like the most powerless bystander, watching her panic because of the sudden roar, watching her try to defend me, only to be met with deeper misunderstanding. Grandma. I shouted silently, reaching out to hug her, but my fingertips passed through her thin, frail shoulders without resistance. I couldn't touch her, couldn't embrace her. I couldn't even feel her warmth. This was probably the greatest punishment for me. To be left in the world. To watch the only person who cared about me suffer because of me. But not even be able to wipe away her tears. 3 years ago, when I regained consciousness, I found myself back with Grandma. No physical body, no voice, just a wisp of a soul attached to this old house, attached to Grandma. I didn't know why I hadn't completely disappeared. Maybe it was because I was worried about her. I had depended on Grandma since I was a child. She was the only person in this world who loved me unconditionally. I was dead. She was deaf and blind, walking unsteadily. How could she live alone? For the past 3 years, I watched her sit in that old rattan chair by the door day after day, gazing at the small path where I left home, from dawn till dusk. Watching her anxiously gesticulate because she couldn't hear others clearly, watching her bump into furniture because of her poor eyesight, while still muttering, Serena, be careful, don't bump into anything. She was always calling for me, but I could no longer answer her. I thought time would slowly heal everything, at least enough to make Ryan believe that I hadn't left without saying goodbye. But I was wrong. 3 years, a full 3 years, and in his heart, I, Serena, had become a shameful traitor, a deserter who killed her brothers. Who made him think that way? What exactly was the deal with the so-called operation route leak? Did Jay and the others really sacrifice themselves? A chill rose from the depths of my soul. I died unclearly, only remembering the final pain and darkness before losing consciousness. I didn't know what happened afterwards at all. Could my death be related to that mission? Grandma fumbled to put the phone back on the bedside table and sighed softly. She held her knees, slowly stood up, and walked unsteadily towards the kitchen, muttering, Serena must be hungry. I need to cook. She was going to make food for 2 again. She had been doing this for the past 3 years. I followed her into the kitchen, watching her tremble as she rinsed the rice and washed the vegetables, her movements slow and clumsy. The light from outside the window shone through the dusty glass, outlining her lonely figure, so small, so alone. Grandma, I'm not hungry, I can't eat. I circled around her fruitlessly, knowing she couldn't hear me, but still couldn't help but say it over and over again. She couldn't hear my voice or see my existence. She was just stubbornly living in a world where I still existed, using her increasingly failing body and memory to protect the me that was already gone. looking at the blue flames flickering on the stove and the rising steam in the pot. My consciousness seemed to be pulled back to those warm past memories. I remembered when I had a fever as a child. She stayed up all night watching over me. I remembered how she saved money to send me to school, leaving the best for me. I remembered that after I joined the organization, every time before a mission, she would always hesitate to speak, and finally it would only turn into a sentence. Serena, come back early, Grandma will wait for you to eat. But the last time I left, I never went back. Ryan, how could you think I would leave a grandmother like that to enjoy myself? How could you think that I would betray something I would protect with my life? We once fought side by side. We once entrusted our backs to each other. Was your understanding and trust in me so vulnerable? Anger and resentment grew like weeds in my heart, but were quickly overwhelmed by a deeper sense of powerlessness. Arguing and explaining were luxuries for a dead person. The only thing I could do now was to stay with Grandma, watch over her, pray for her safety, and pray that time would be kind to her. However, even this humble wish seemed to be on the verge of being shattered. Ryan didn't believe I was dead. A few days later, one evening, the setting sun was like blood, painting the dilapidated door of the small courtyard with an ominous red glow. The roar of an engine grew from far away, and finally stopped abruptly outside the door. Grandma was dozing in the rattan chair, startled awake by the sound, and looked up blankly. Floating in the air above the courtyard, I watched the familiar black SUV, and my heart suddenly stopped beating. The car door opened, and the first thing that stepped out was a long leg clad in black combat pants, followed by a tall, slender figure. Ryan. 3 years, he looked colder, with an unmelting frost and malevolence between his brows. The eyes that once reflected starlight and tenderness were now filled with sharp, hawkish scrutiny and suppressed anger. He exuded a powerful aura that kept strangers away, and walked towards the small courtyard step by step. And the woman who followed him out of the car, walking gracefully, made my soul tremble. Scarlett. She was wearing a delicate white dress, with a perfect look of concern on her face and a hint of barely noticeable superiority. Why was she here? She was with Ryan? The moment I saw her, a strong sense of unease gripped me. Grandma seemed to recognize Ryan as well. She held onto the rattan chair armrest, trying to stand up with some difficulty, her face with a hint of cautious anticipation, perhaps thinking he had come to visit. But Ryan's first sentence shattered all illusions. He stood at the gate of the courtyard, his gaze sweeping every corner of the small courtyard like a cold searchlight, finally settling on Grandma's face, his voice as cold as ice. Where is Serena? Tell her to come out. Grandma was stunned. She opened her mouth, but hadn't made a sound yet. Scarlett had already walked forward softly, gently taking Ryan's arm, her voice gentle, but like a snake's tongue creeping into my ears. Brother Ryan, don't be like this, you're scaring the old lady. Serena. Maybe she just has difficulties? Although Jay and the others died so miserably. But maybe Serena is now abroad, living a good life? We were friends after all. She said friends, but her tone was full of implication and agitation. Difficulties? Ryan sneered, his eyes growing even colder. Her difficulties are that she was greedy for life and afraid of death, betrayed her brothers, and exchanged it for wealth and luxury? No, it's not like that. I frantically rushed to him, waving my arms in vain. Ryan, shut up. Listen to Grandma. I didn't. But my cry was met with only silence. Grandma was trembling with anger at the ruthlessness in his words and Scarlett's seemingly comforting, but actually inflammatory words. She shook her head vigorously, tears welling up in her eyes, and refuted with a muddled but extremely firm voice. You're talking nonsense. My Serena isn't that kind of person. She's dead, she's not coming back, the grave I built for her is in the back mountain. Go and see if you don't believe me. Scarlett said oops softly, wiped away non-existent tears with a handkerchief, and sighed. Grandma, don't get excited. We know you feel sorry for Serena, but the fact is the fact. The police have evidence. The route was indeed leaked from Serena's encrypted channel. She is now the #1 wanted criminal, and Brother Ryan is also acting impartially. If you protect her like this, won't you let her go further and further down the wrong path? Maybe she is hiding in some corner, watching you worry about her. The venom in these words was almost tangible. She was implying that Grandma was lying. She was implying that I was coldly watching Grandma suffer. She was throwing the dirtiest water on my name, which couldn't even rest in peace after death. Scarlett. Shut up. I stared at her, eyes cracking with rage, wishing I could pounce and tear apart her fake face. How could I have ever thought her innocent and kind? Ryan had obviously believed Scarlett's words. He looked at Grandma with even more impatience and suspicion. Grave? Ha, faking death, escaping by deception. I've seen these tricks countless times. Serena, I'd recognize her even if she turned to ashes. He forcefully pushed open the courtyard door and strode towards the house, clearly intending to search it himself. No, Ryan. Please don't go in. Don't upset Grandma. I pleaded, following behind him, watching him roughly rummage through the things in what used to be my room. The objects that held my past memories were ruthlessly swept to the ground. Grandma staggered in behind, looking at the mess in the room, tears streaming down her face, repeating weakly, "She's dead, really dead." Serena came to me in my dreams. She said she was cold. She said she was in pain. If she were still alive, how could she not come back to see me? We were each other's everything. Dreams. That's because my soul has nowhere to go, and can only linger at the edge of her dreams, conveying fragmented sensations. Ryan paused. He picked up the photo on the bedside table, the one of me in my uniform, my smile bright, my eyes clear. His fingers gripped it so hard his knuckles turned white. His expression complex for a moment, but it was quickly covered by a deeper hatred. Dreams. He sneered and slammed the photo face down. Playing tricks. Serena, you better never show your face again, or I'll personally bring you to justice. Scarlett stood at the doorway, watching everything, a very faint, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She used a hushed tone, only audible to me, as if speaking into the air. Serena, do you hear that? The person you love wants you dead with no remains left. You just be a good corpse and take the blame. That old hag looks like she'll be down to keep you company soon. At that moment, my soul body trembled, almost collapsing. Hatred spread like wildfire. Ryan Scarlett, how dare you? How dare you treat a frail old woman like this? How dare you defile my name like this? But I can't do anything. I can only watch Ryan leave in a rage, having found nothing, and watch Scarlett pretend to comfort Grandma for a few words, then turn away with undisguised malice and contempt on her face. The courtyard returned to peace. A deeper peace than before, leaving only Grandma's low, suppressed sobbing and a terrible mess. Ryan left, filled with undiminished anger and convinced of my escape. Scarlett also left, with a meaningful glance before she went, like a poisonous snake crawling across my soul, leaving a cold, sticky feeling. The small courtyard returned to silence, a silence deeper than before. Grandma didn't move. She was still standing in the middle of the messy main room, her hunched back under the dim light, like a stone sculpture about to erode. She wasn't crying anymore, just staring blankly at the old things of mine that Ryan had turned upside down, her eyes empty, as if the last bit of her spirit had been taken away. Grandma. I walked around to face her, trying in vain to block her sight, wanting to embrace her, but her cloudy eyes passed through me and landed in the void. After a long time, she slowly, very slowly, squatted down, reached out her hands, covered with calluses and wrinkles, and trembled as she picked up the photos and books scattered on the ground. Her movements were slow, and every time she bent over, it seemed exceptionally difficult. She picked up a photo of her and me, and carefully wiped the non-existent dust off it with her sleeve, murmuring, "Don't be afraid, Serena, Grandma's here. Grandma will clean up and wait for you to come back." My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand, so painful I couldn't breathe. She's still waiting for me to come back. Even though Ryan said so certainly that I was a traitor, even though Scarlett so maliciously implied that I had abandoned her to enjoy myself, she still stubbornly believed that I would return. This unreserved trust, at this moment, felt like the sharpest knife, slowly slicing me apart. Grandma, I can't come back. I really can't come back. I knelt beside her, watching her clean up the mess bit by bit, watching her fumble because she couldn't see clearly, watching her stagger because of her legs and feet, the huge sense of powerlessness and guilt almost swallowing up my residual soul. I hate it. I hate my own incompetence. I hate the people who killed me. I hate Ryan's indiscriminate accusations. Even more, I hate Scarlett's heartless tactics. That so-called evidence? Leaked encrypted channels? The last mission before I died. My memories are covered in a thick, bloody mist. I only remember the emergency departure signal. Ryan's solemn face, remember. I remember Scarlett seemed to be on the outskirts of command at the time. She even smiled and handed me a glass of water, wishing me luck. My head aches horribly. The later memories are fragmented. There's only endless darkness and cold pain. Could the problem really be on my side? But how could I possibly leak the route? That's Jay, that's Finn, that's the lives of so many comrades in arms. No, it's impossible. I, Serena, may not be smart enough or strong enough, but I will never betray my oath and my comrades. It's Scarlett. It must be her. Her pretentious manner, her seemingly unintentional words that actually guided the conversation. And when she looked at me, the jealousy and malice hidden beneath her gentle facade. I used to think she was just a bit spoiled, had some petty temperament, but I never thought deeply about it. But now, piecing it all together, everything feels strange. Ryan, that blind man. Bastard. He actually believed her instead of me. In the days that followed, Grandma became even more silent. She would still cook, make 2 servings, set out 2 sets of chopsticks, and then talk to the empty seat. She spoke even less. Her eyes were even more dazed, sometimes sitting in the wicker chair all day, forgetting to eat. I stayed by her side, anxiously like an ant on a hot pot. I was afraid she would collapse, afraid she would get sick because of my affairs. Although Ryan didn't show up again, I knew he wouldn't give up. He's like a leopard lurking in the dark, ready to pounce again at any time, completely shattering Grandma's already fragile mental world. Sure enough, my worries became a reality. One afternoon a few days later, Grandma was carrying a grocery basket, slowly wanting to go to the small market in town to buy some tofu. Her spirits were low and she was already walking unsteadily. And when crossing the road, she was even more absent-minded. A motorcycle sped past, honking its horn. Grandma was startled, tripped over her feet, and fell to the side. "Grandma!" I screamed in horror, subconsciously rushing over to support her. It was still in vain. I watched helplessly as her forehead hit the stone steps on the side of the road, blood gushing out instantly, staining her white hair and wrinkled face red. People gathered around, helping her up. Someone called for an ambulance. Grandma closed her eyes, her face pale, the blood on her forehead shocking. She was still tightly clutching that old grocery basket in her hand, several shriveled oranges rolling out of it. At that moment my soul flew away. Huge fear and anger swept over me. If Ryan and Scarlett hadn't come to make such a fuss and upset Grandma, how could she have been so distracted that something like this happened? It's all them. It's all their fault. I stayed by Grandma's side, following the ambulance to the town hospital, watching her being pushed into the emergency room, watching the doctors and nurses busy, while I couldn't do anything, only wandering around the corridor like a ghost, praying that she would be safe. Grandma needed to be hospitalized for observation. She was placed in a 3-person ward. Her forehead was stitched up, wrapped in gauze, her face was still pale, and she was drowsy, sleeping. I stayed by her bedside, watching her frown uneasily even in her sleep, my heart tightening into a ball. Just then, 2 people I least wanted to see appeared at the door of the ward. Ryan and Scarlett. Ryan was still cold and severe, but there seemed to be a trace of almost imperceptible annoyance between his brows. He stood at the door, not immediately coming in, his gaze falling on Grandma, who was haggard on the bed, his expression complicated and difficult to discern. Scarlett, on the other hand, was carrying a fruit basket, with an appropriately concerned and sympathetic expression on her face. She took the lead to come in, her voice gentle, as if afraid to disturb the patient. "Oh dear, how did this happen? Is Grandma all right?" She placed the fruit basket on the bedside table, then looked at Ryan and said softly, "Ryan, don't worry too much. The doctor said it's just a superficial injury, just need a few days of observation." I stared at them, especially Scarlett. Worried? How could she really be worried about Grandma? Crocodile tears. Ryan silently walked in, stood at the end of the bed, looked at Grandma, and after a long time he spoke in a low voice, his tone without emotion. "What happened?" A kind-hearted family member of the patient in the next bedside and said, Ah, the old woman is getting old. It's not easy living alone. I heard she was robbed a few days ago. She must have been frightened. Her spirits are bad, and she didn't pay attention when crossing the road, so she fell. Robbed? Ryan frowned. Scarlett immediately chimed in, her voice filled with a hint of helplessness and regret. It wasn't a robbery. It was Ryan. He was just here for work, and he was in a bad mood. He came to ask Serena about something. Maybe he was a bit rough, and it scared Grandma. As she spoke, she looked at Grandma apologetically, as if she felt extremely guilty. I was trembling with anger. That bitch. She downplayed Ryan's rough search, calling it a bit rough, and implied that it was because I was hiding that all this happened. Ryan pressed his lips together, not saying anything, but the look in his eyes as he stared at Grandma deepened. Grandma seemed to be awakened by the voices and slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were initially confused, but when she saw Ryan standing at the foot of the bed and Scarlett by her side, a look of fear and resistance immediately appeared on her face, and she subconsciously shrank back. What are you here for again? Her voice was weak and trembling. Serena's gone. Really gone. Please, don't come looking for her anymore. And don't come looking for this old woman anymore. Her plea pierced my heart like a needle. Ryan's Adam's apple bobbed. He seemed like he wanted to say something, but in the end he only uttered a stiff, "Get some rest." Scarlett leaned down, picked up an orange, and began peeling it slowly, all the while speaking in that sickeningly gentle tone. Grandma, don't be afraid. We're not here to cause trouble. Ryan cares about you. See, you live alone, it's not safe. This time you fell. What if something worse happens next time? Serena is really something else. Even if she has some reason, she shouldn't have left you alone like this. She offered the peeled orange to Grandma, but Grandma abruptly turned her head away, refusing to take it. Scarlett's hand froze in midair. A flash of barely perceptible anger crossed her face, but it quickly morphed into a look of grievance as she looked at Ryan. Ryan, I just wanted to show Grandma some concern. Enough. Ryan suddenly interrupted her, his voice laced with a hint of weariness. Let her rest. He looked deeply at Grandma. In his eyes there seemed to be struggle, doubt, but even more that stubborn lingering hatred caused by me. He turned to leave. Seeing this, Scarlett had no choice but to put down the orange and turn as well. But in that instant, as Ryan's back was turned to the bed and Grandma had closed her eyes in fear, she spat out a quick, vicious, and very low curse in Grandma's direction. Old hag, why don't you just die cleanly? Eyesore. Those words, like ice picks laced with poison, instantly pierced my soul. I lunged forward, wanting to tear her to shreds. But I only passed through her body in vain. Scarlett, I'm going to kill you. I roared silently, my hatred reaching the heavens. Ryan seemed to sense something. He paused and glanced back. Scarlett immediately put on a gentle expression and said softly, What's wrong, Ryan? Ryan's gaze swept over the trembling Grandma on the bed, then over the innocent Scarlett. In the end he said nothing and strode out of the room. Scarlett followed closely behind. Before exiting, she turned back toward the bed and flashed a cold smile filled with malice and mockery. The room fell silent again. Grandma curled up on the bed like an overly frightened little animal, sobbing softly. I stood by her side, watching her shoulders tremble with fear and sadness, watching the gauze on her forehead seep with blood. My soul felt as if it had been thrown into a vat of oil and repeatedly fried. Ryan, did you see that? Did you hear that? This is the woman you trust and protect. She can be so viciously cursing an old woman lying in bed right in front of you. Why don't you believe Grandma? Why don't you believe me? Are all those feelings of sharing life and death with each other not as valuable as Scarlett's fake performance? Hate. Unprecedented hatred, crazily germinating and spreading in my dead heart. If hatred could kill, I would have cut Scarlett into 1,000 pieces long ago. If resentment could take shape, I would definitely turn into a vengeful ghost, condemning her to eternal damnation. But I can't do anything. I can only watch Grandma suffer, watch my enemy live freely, watch the person I once loved be blinded and become an accomplice in harming my loved one. This sense of powerlessness is more despairing than death itself. Grandma stayed in the hospital for 3 days. These 3 days were like 30 years to me. I watched her moan in pain at night, watched her panic because of the unfamiliar hospital environment, watched her mutter, "Serena doesn't like to eat this," to the food that the nurse brought. Every minute, every second, was torture. Ryan and Scarlett didn't appear again. But this didn't make me feel any easier. Ryan's deep, unfathomable gaze before he left was like the sword of Damocles hanging over my head, keeping me from peace. He definitely wouldn't give up so easily. Sure enough, the day after Grandma was discharged from the hospital and returned home, that familiar black SUV stopped outside the little courtyard again in the afternoon. This time it was only Ryan. He was wearing casual clothes, lacking the sternness of his uniform, but possessing a bit more of a somber, dangerous aura. He was carrying a supermarket plastic bag filled with rice, flour and cooking oil. It looked like a visit. I floated warily to the courtyard gate, staring at him intently. Grandma was sitting in the courtyard sunbathing. The warm sunlight shone on her old, haggard face, but couldn't dispel the air of deathly stillness. Hearing the car, she opened her eyes. The moment she saw Ryan, she visibly shrank back. Her cloudy eyes filled with fear and resistance. "You. What are you here for again?" Her voice trembled, and her hands instinctively gripped the armrests of the wicker chair. Ryan stood outside the courtyard gate, not immediately coming in. His gaze fell on the wound on Grandma's forehead that hadn't been stitched up yet. It swept over her frightened face, and his brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. He raised the bag in his hand, his voice still cold, but it seemed that he had deliberately lowered it a little. "Just passing by, checking on you. By the way, just want to ask a few more questions." "I don't know anything." "Serena is dead, don't ask any more." Grandma shook her head, almost crying. Ryan was unmoved. He pushed open the courtyard gate and walked in. He put the bag on the stone table in the courtyard, then pulled over a small stool and sat down in front of Grandma. This posture didn't look like an interrogation. It looked more like a conversation. But his gaze was still scrutinizing, sharp. "Grandma," he began, his voice low, "I know you love Serena, but some things can't just be wiped away just because you say she's gone." He paused, staring intently at Grandma with piercing eyes. "Jay, do you remember him? The young man who used to come to the house to help you fix the roof, who had a snaggle tooth when he smiled?" Grandma froze for a moment, a look of recollection and pain flashing in her eyes. She nodded. "He's dead." Ryan's voice was devoid of emotion, but it carried a heavy weight. "And Finn Owen. Of the 7 brothers who went together, only 3 came back, all of them injured. Finn lost a leg and will never stand up again in this lifetime." My heart sank heavily. "Jay, Finn. They are all." The route they took was top secret. Only a very small number of people knew. Ryan leaned forward slightly, bringing great pressure to bear on Grandma. And the source of the leak, after technical tracing, was locked onto Serena's personal encrypted channel. An hour before she disappeared, abnormal data was transmitted. "Impossible!" I screamed beside him. "My channel password is only known to me. I have never leaked anything." Grandma also became agitated, waving her hands forcefully. "No way. Serena wouldn't do such a thing. She's a good girl. She must have been framed." "Framed?" Ryan tugged at the corner of his mouth, his smile cold and sarcastic. "The evidence is conclusive. Moreover, after the mission failed, she disappeared. No one has seen her alive, and no one has seen her dead. If she didn't have a guilty conscience, why would she run away?" "She didn't run, she died." Grandma stood up agitatedly. Because of the sudden movement, her vision went black, and her body swayed. Ryan instinctively reached out to help, but Grandma dodged him in fear. His hand froze in midair, slowly retracting, clenching into a fist, his knuckles white. "Dead." He repeated the word, his eyes filled with hatred surging again. "Then where's her body? You said she came to you in a dream, saying she was cold and in pain. Then where exactly did she die? How did she die? Why, after 3 years, can't we find even a bone?" His voice grew louder and sharper with each sentence, lashing out at Grandma like a whip, also lashing out at my remnant soul. I don't know." Grandma was at a loss for words, only able to cry helplessly. "She just told me she wasn't coming back. She said she was cold." A dream? Ryan scoffed, standing up and looking down at the trembling grandma. His tone was filled with undisguised mockery and doubt. Do you think I'd believe such ethereal things? Grandma, I can understand your protectiveness, but protecting a traitor is the greatest injustice to those dead and crippled brothers. She didn't betray them. Grandma screamed with all her might, coughing violently because of her agitation. Her old face turned red. My heart was about to break. I rushed in front of him, roaring at him. Ryan, you bastard, open your eyes and see. Does Grandma look like she's lying? I'm dead, I'm really dead. Why won't you believe me? He couldn't hear. He only felt that Grandma was stubbornly defending me, using a ridiculous dream excuse to fob him off. He looked at Grandma, who was coughing and gasping for breath, without a trace of emotion in his eyes, only deeper annoyance and disbelief. He probably thought it was just a charade Grandma was putting on to make my hiding more secure. Okay, even if she's dead. Ryan's voice was as cold as ice. Then, before she died, did she leave anything behind? Did she say anything strange? Did she come into contact with anyone special? Grandma just shook her head, shaking it incessantly, tears blurring her vision. Ryan stared at her for a long while finally, as if he had exhausted all his patience. He took a deep breath, his tone returning to its previous cold and forceful state. I will find her. Whether she's dead or alive. If she's dead, I'll bring her ashes back and make her kneel before Jay and the others' graves to apologize. If she's alive. He paused, a flash of fierce coldness in his eyes. I'll personally send her to prison, or execute her on the spot. Execute her on the spot. For words, like 4 sharp knives, shattered my last hope into pieces. He really didn't have a shred of old affection for me, only deep-seated hatred. After he finished speaking, he didn't look at the collapsing Grandma, turned around and strode away. His back was resolute, without a trace of lingering. The courtyard door was slammed shut by him, making a loud bang, which completely crushed Grandma's sustained nerves. She slumped into the wicker chair, like a flower that was withering rapidly, leaving only suppressed, desperate sobs. The sun was still warm, the small courtyard was still quiet, but here, it had become a cage of despair. I floated beside Grandma, watching her thin shoulders tremble from sobbing, watching the bag of condolences he had left on the ground, feeling only immense irony. Ryan, you came with hatred, left behind so-called concern, and then used the most cruel words to push the old woman into the abyss again. You kept talking about your dead brothers, but everything you're doing now is tormenting another innocent, desperate old woman. Is this what you call justice? I hate his stubbornness, hate his blindness, hate that he's being manipulated by Scarlet without realizing it. But no amount of hatred can change the situation. I'm dead, I can't tell the truth. He doesn't believe a word Grandma says. Is he just going to keep interrogating Grandma like this, until she has a complete mental breakdown? Am I just going to bear the stigma of a traitor, never to be exonerated? No, I can't give up. Even for Grandma's sake, I have to do something. My gaze involuntarily turned to my room. There might still be traces of my life. Perhaps Ryan overlooked something during his last crude search? And Scarlet? Why was she outside the command headquarters? That glass of water of hers. Fragments of broken memories tumbled in my mind, and a vague idea gradually took shape. After Ryan left, the small courtyard fell into deeper silence. Grandma cried in the wicker chair for a long time, until she ran out of strength and fell into a dazed sleep. The sunlight shifted, shrouding her thin figure in shadow, making her look especially desolate. I couldn't rest in peace. Ryan's phrase, execute her on the spot, echoed in my ears like a curse. Hatred and anxiety intertwined and collided in my soul. I had to do something. I couldn't just passively wait for his next, more cruel visit. My gaze involuntarily turned to my room. There might still be traces of my life. My room was still in the mess he had left after his last search. Books, photo albums, and some old objects were scattered all over the floor. Grandma had tidied up briefly afterwards, but many corners still had traces of being rummaged through. Ryan doesn't believe in dream interpretation, doesn't believe Grandma's words, he only believes in cold, hard evidence. Then what if it was evidence he found himself? I floated into the room, my eyes scanning every corner. My old computer had long been dismantled and inspected by his people, with nothing found. My diary had also been flipped through. It only recorded some daily trivia and concern for Grandma, which in his opinion, was probably further evidence of my disguise. What else? My gaze fell on the hidden compartment in the bedside table drawer. It was a very hidden compartment, a place where I hid treasures when I was a child. The last time Ryan roughly pulled out the drawer, things were scattered all over the floor. He probably didn't notice that thin compartment. What was inside? I tried hard to remember. It seemed to be an old memory card. That's right, it was from an old phone I used to have. The phone broke later, and I never threw away the card. I just randomly stuffed it in there. What's stored inside? It seemed to be some photos and a recording? The memory was a bit fuzzy. It seemed like a long time ago. What kind of recording? I tried to focus my consciousness, wanting to sense the things in that compartment. As a soul, I couldn't touch physical objects, but a strong intuition told me that there was something there. Just then, the sound of an engine came from outside the courtyard gate again. My heart jumped. Was he back again? This time it wasn't Ryan, but two young people wearing plain clothes, but with an air of efficiency in their actions. I recognized them. They were from Ryan's action team. They knocked on the door. Grandma was startled awake, and when she saw the strangers, she was filled with another wave of terror. "Old lady, don't be afraid." One of them showed his identification. His tone was relatively polite, but with an undeniable air of official business. "We are under orders to check Serena's belongings again, hoping to find some clues that can help determine her whereabouts." Grandma opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but finally just lowered her head weakly, silently letting them pass. They went straight to my room. I followed closely behind, my heart racing. They were more professional and more meticulous than Ryan. Last time it was a crude search, this time, it was a carpet search. They put on white gloves, carefully flipping through each item, even scanning the walls and floor with portable equipment. Grandma stood in the doorway of the room, watching their movements, her aging face full of numb pain. Minute after minute passed. The two young men had practically turned the room upside down, still finding nothing. Just as they were about to give up and say goodbye to Grandma, one of them inadvertently glanced at the bedside table that had been pulled out and placed on the ground. He crouched down, shining a flashlight on the internal structure of the drawer. My heart was in my throat. He reached out his finger and gently tapped a few times on the bottom of the inside of the drawer, making a faint hollow sound. His eyes narrowed. He skillfully found the buckle, gently flipped it, and the thin compartment popped open. A small, dusty, black memory card was lying quietly inside. "Found it," the young man whispered, carefully picked up the memory card with tweezers, and placed it in an evidence bag. Grandma looked on blankly, not knowing what it was. But I felt a violent tremor in my soul. That blurred memory instantly cleared. It was 3 years ago, after an informal debriefing meeting, Scarlett and I were chatting in the lounge, and she complained about a new staff officer at the command headquarters who was arrogant and spoke very harshly, and I casually chimed in with a few words. I didn't think much of it at the time, so I subconsciously recorded it with my old phone, thinking that it might be used as corroboration in the future. Later, I was busy so I forgot about the recording, the phone broke, and the card had been lying there. The recording itself was insignificant, but the key was that it recorded that point in time, when Scarlett and I were together. Moreover, in the background of the recording, there seemed to be a faint, specific prompt sound from the command headquarters' internal communication system. What could this prove? I was thinking rapidly. Maybe it couldn't directly prove my innocence, but at least it was a time anchor. It could prove my whereabouts around the time of the alleged leak. Would Ryan notice? Would he investigate further? The two young men left with the memory card. The small courtyard returned to silence again, but I knew that the center of the storm was shifting in a certain direction. Grandma looked on blankly, not knowing what it was. But I felt a violent tremor in my soul. The next few days, Ryan didn't appear again. Grandma's spirits were slightly better, but the wound on her forehead and the trauma in her heart were not so easy to heal. She became more silent, often staring blankly into the air. I waited anxiously. Every moment was agony. That small memory card became my only hope. Finally, On the evening of the 5th day, Ryan came again. This time, his face was even more gloomy, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept well for days. He held a tablet in his hand. He didn't bring any gifts of sympathy, nor did he offer any pretense of small talk. He walked directly to Grandma, who was sitting in a rattan chair, and showed her the screen of the tablet. On it was the waveform of an audio file, along with a translated text transcript. This recording was found among Serena's old belongings. His voice was hoarse with a repressed, almost unnatural calm. The female voices in it, besides her, the other one is Scarlett. The recording time shows it was 40 minutes before the operation started. Grandma looked at the screen blankly, then at him, not understanding what it meant. The content of the recording is irrelevant. Ryan stared at Grandma, his eyes sharp as knives. However, in the background noise, a specific frequency prompt tone of the command headquarters' internal communication system was captured. This prompt tone is only triggered when the encrypted channel is actively logged into or called. My heart clenched violently. He had noticed after all. According to technical analysis, this trigger time point is highly consistent with the start time of the leaked data stream. Ryan spoke slowly, each word like a heavy hammer striking my heart, and also striking Grandma's fragile nerves. In other words, at the time of the leak, Serena and Scarlett were very likely near the command headquarters or even in an area where they could access the encrypted equipment. He took a step forward, glaring at Grandma, his tone suddenly intensifying. Grandma, tell me, if Serena really died 3 years ago, as you said, or left long ago, how do you explain this recording? How do you explain this time point? She was clearly at the scene at that time. She had the opportunity to access the encrypted channel. She disappeared only after that. Is this just a coincidence? His questioning was like a storm, with the force of ironclad evidence, almost drowning Grandma. I don't know. Serena didn't say. Grandma was frightened by him into incoherence, only repeating, she's dead, she's really dead. Dead. Ryan sneered, pointing to the timestamp on the tablet. Then how do you explain this time point, this location, this irrefutable audio evidence? Did her ghost float back to record it after she died? His mockery was like poison needles, stabbing my soul painfully. He had found a clue, but he was interpreting it in a way that made him hate me even more. He was convinced that I was at the scene at the time, convinced that I was a major suspect. He even thought that Grandma's so-called dead was to cover up the truth of my escape after committing the crime. No, Ryan, listen to me. That recording can only prove that I was with Scarlett at the time, that we may have both been at the scene when the leak happened. Why are you so sure it was me? Why couldn't it be Scarlett? I shouted frantically beside him, waving my arms in vain. He couldn't hear me. He was immersed in his own logic, blinded by hatred and so-called evidence. He looked at Grandma's terrified, unexplainable appearance, the suspicion and anger in his eyes intensifying. He took a deep breath, as if trying his best to restrain the urge to strangle me, the traitor. Okay, very good. He put away the tablet, his eyes icy cold. You continue to protect her. I will find more evidence. I will make her have nowhere to hide. He turned and left, his back resolute, with the stubbornness of not resting until he found the truth. Watching his departing figure, I felt ice cold all over. I had originally hoped that this recording would arouse his suspicion and make him turn his attention to Scarlett. But I underestimated his hatred, underestimated his preconceived notions. In his heart, I, Serena, was the traitor. Any clues pointing to me would be magnified infinitely, becoming evidence of my crime. And any details that might clear my name would be subconsciously ignored or distorted by him, guiding him to investigate. This path seemed more difficult and more dangerous than I had imagined. Because before he found the real truth, each of his discoveries would make him hate me more, and also bring greater harm to Grandma. I looked at Grandma, who was trembling again in fear, sobbing softly, and a deep sense of powerlessness and panic welled up in the depths of my soul. Ryan, what exactly do you want to believe that I'm really dead? What exactly do you want to open your eyes and see the woman who has been by your side all along, smiling sweetly, but who may be harboring evil intentions? Ryan left with the recording and deeper doubts, leaving Grandma trembling in the twilight. I looked at the dust raised by his car, and my soul felt like it was immersed in an icy sea. Instead of guiding him towards the truth, I had made him even more convinced of my crime. That recording became his proof of presence that I couldn't refute in his eyes. Despair, like vines, wrapped around me, almost suffocating me. Grandma was frightened and developed a low fever that night, talking nonsense, sometimes calling my name, and sometimes begging Ryan in fear not to come again. I stayed by her bed, watching her writhe in pain, wishing I could immediately dissipate my soul and exchange it for a moment of peace for her. In the following days, Ryan didn't come in person anymore, but the people under him came more frequently. They were no longer confined to my room, but began to question the neighbors, to inquire at the town's small shops, trying to piece together my movements before my disappearance. Every time someone knocked on the door, Grandma would tremble like a startled rabbit. Her spirits deteriorated, her eyes were often dazed, and sometimes she could talk to an empty chair for half a day. I knew she was talking to me, but I couldn't respond. This pain of watching my loved one being driven to the brink, but being unable to do anything, was even worse than the torture I suffered before I died. At the same time, Scarlett came again. This time she didn't come with Ryan, alone, driving a low-key white car. She wore an elegant dress, carried a delicate insulated lunchbox, and had an impeccable look of concern on her face. "Grandma, I heard you weren't feeling well a few days ago, so I specially made some soup for you." Her voice was gentle as she placed the insulated lunchbox on the table, her movements graceful. Grandma's pupils contracted sharply when she saw her, and her body instinctively shrank back, her lips trembling, unable to speak. Scarlett seemed not to see Grandma's fear, and opened the insulated lunchbox on her own, the rich aroma of chicken soup filling the air. She ladled out a bowl and handed it to Grandma, her tone with a touch of just the right amount of blame and pity. "Look at you, you've lost weight again. It's not easy to live alone. Sister Serena is really too cruel. Even if there's something big going on, you can't just leave you alone. You go." Grandma's voice was weak, with a sob. Scarlett sighed, put down the bowl, and sat on a small stool opposite Grandma, her posture graceful. She looked around the dilapidated small courtyard, her gaze finally landing on Grandma's haggard face, her tone still gentle, but the words she spoke were like a viper's hiss. "Grandma, I know you miss her, but you have to recognize reality. Sister Serena, she is not the Serena she used to be. She'll do anything for money, to live a good life. Do you know? The intelligence she leaked didn't just kill Jay and the others, but also a lot of innocent people. Her hands are covered in blood." "You're talking nonsense." Grandma became agitated, trembling all over. "Whether I'm talking nonsense or not, Ryan has the evidence." Scarlett leaned in slightly, her voice lowered, with a seductive kind of cruelty. "Grandma, you're protecting her, you're helping the evildoers, the families of those who died, who will bear their pain. Every time you defend her, it's like stabbing another knife into the hearts of those families." She watched Grandma close her eyes in pain because of her words, the corners of her mouth curving into a pleased arc, and continued to say the most vicious things in that gentle tone. "If you ask me, it's better that she's dead. Such a traitor is a disgrace to be alive. If she has any conscience, she shouldn't implicate you any further. If she's really dead, then it's really a worthwhile death. Get out. Get out of here." Grandma finally broke down, grabbed the cattail fan next to her and threw it at Scarlett, the force weak, the fan landing lightly on the ground. Scarlett easily dodged it, a trace of offended grievance on her face. She stood up, straightened her skirt, and her tone was slightly helpless. "Grandma, don't get excited. I'm doing this for your own good. You should think about it carefully. Continuing like this won't do anyone any good." After she finished speaking, she gave Grandma a meaningful look, then turned and left gracefully. In the moment she turned, I clearly saw that the feigned gentleness and worry on her face instantly faded, leaving only icy revulsion and triumph. I let out a silent roar, the hatred burning in my soul like tangible flames. "This bitch. How dare she? How dare she slander me like that in front of Grandma? Like that cut to the heart." After Scarlett left, Grandma collapsed in the rattan chair, as if all her strength had been drawn away, only tears sliding down silently. The bowl of chicken soup was still on the table, exuding an enticing fragrance, but it was displayed there like a sacrifice, mocking our helplessness. Just then the courtyard door was pushed open again. It was Ryan who had returned. He seemed to have come back to pick up something he had left behind, and happened to bump into Scarlett's departing figure, as well as the mess in the courtyard and the tearful grandma. Ryan's footsteps stopped. He looked at the direction Scarlett disappeared in, then looked at the collapsed grandma, his brow furrowed tightly. What happened? He walked in, his voice low, with a trace of imperceptible doubt. His gaze swept over the insulated lunchbox on the table and the cattail fan on the ground. Grandma was even more frightened when she saw him, only crying, unable to speak. Ryan stood there silently, his tall figure drawn long in the setting sun. He didn't immediately press her like he had before, but just looked at Grandma, his eyes changing complexly. Was it because he saw Scarlett leaving just now, and then saw Grandma in this state, that he made some association? I held my breath, staring intently at him. He crouched down and picked up the palm leaf fan from the ground, placing it on the stone table. His movements were no longer as oppressive as before, but somewhat stiff. What did she come here for? He asked, his voice still low, but with less sharpness. Grandma just shook her head, sobbing uncontrollably. Ryan didn't ask again. He stood in the courtyard, looking around at the dilapidated little courtyard filled with sadness and despair, his gaze finally landing on Grandma's old face, covered in tears and pain. The lines on his face were still cold and hard, but in those eyes that always burned with hatred and determination, something seemed to loosen, ever so slightly. Was it the contrast between Grandma's near-desperate collapse and Scarlett's composure after happening to appear and leave? Or was it a faint warning being issued by a trace of understanding of me that might still exist deep in his heart, buried by hatred? He didn't know. He just felt that the scene before him was somewhat incongruous with what he thought the family of a traitor should be like. How could the mother of a carefree traitor be so emaciated and terrified? Why would a Scarlett who was only here to care cause the old woman to become so agitated that she even threw things? These questions were subtle, like stones thrown into a deep pool, temporarily only stirring up a small circle of ripples, which would soon be covered by a larger wave of hatred. But he did pause, he did have that moment of doubt. He didn't press Grandma any further, nor did he leave any words. He just looked at her deeply, then silently turned and left. This time, his back seemed to have less decisiveness and more heaviness. I watched his car disappear again, my feelings mixed and hard to describe. I still hated him, but that slight loosening, like a ray of light in the darkness, allowed me to grasp a fragile straw in endless despair. Ryan, are you finally starting to doubt? Ryan's moment of hesitation, like a stone thrown into still water, created a circle of ripples in my heart, mixed with hope and bitterness. However, reality did not improve as a result. Grandma was completely crushed by Scarlett's heart-wrenching words, and that night she developed a high fever, rambling incoherently, sometimes calling my nickname, sometimes pleading in fear, "Don't look for Serena." I stayed by her burning side, feeling her life force draining away, and my soul seemed to be scorched as well. The town doctor came to see her and said that she was overly worried and had suffered a sudden onset of anger. He prescribed some medicine, but it had little effect. Grandma spent most of her time unconscious, and when she woke up, her eyes were empty, as if half her soul had already gone with me. I couldn't wait any longer. It seemed that Ryan was also speeding things up. He didn't appear again, but his men were even more active. I floated out of the small courtyard and could occasionally see them investigating in every corner of the town, asking about every detail of that time 3 years ago. Their investigation seemed to be starting to deviate from its initial focus entirely on me. Once I heard 2 team members talking in low voices. The boss wants us to focus on checking the communication records from the few days before the mission 3 years ago. Not just Serena's, but also all the peripheral personnel in headquarters. Peripheral? That's a big range. Yeah, especially anyone who had contact with Serena. My heart leaped. Ryan was finally casting his eyes on a wider range. He was eliminating all possibilities. Did that mean Scarlett was also starting to fall under his stricter scrutiny? Just then, an overlooked detail flashed through my mind like lightning. 3 years ago, about half an hour before the mission, I was nervous and habitually wanted to go to the open-air platform next to headquarters to catch some wind and calm down. There I met Scarlett. She seemed flustered at the time, holding a small, USB-like device. When she saw me, she immediately hid the thing behind her back, put on an unnatural smile, and said she was here to deliver a trivial document. I didn't think much of it at the time, only thinking she was frightened by the serious atmosphere of headquarters. After all, she had always acted like a somewhat timid girl who needed to be protected, but now that I think about it, could her fluster at that time, the thing she was hiding, have something to do with the leak? If I could let Ryan know this detail. But how could I tell him? Send a dream to Grandma? Even if Grandma wasn't delirious now, would Ryan believe her even if she said it clearly? He would only think it was a lie Grandma fabricated to exonerate me. I had to let him discover it himself. My gaze fell on my room again. What else? What else could subtly point to this detail? Fragments of memories kept churning. Platform. Scarlett. USB drive. That's right. The surveillance cameras on the platform at the time. The surveillance cameras on the outside of the headquarters building were fully covered. Although the surveillance camera from that angle might not have captured her hiding the USB drive, it would definitely have captured her being there at that time. And perhaps it might have captured her holding something in her hand or looking unusual. Since Ryan was checking communication records, he must also have the authority to retrieve the surveillance footage. The key was how to get him to retrieve the surveillance footage from that specific time and place. I needed a trigger. My gaze fell on the old cardboard box in the corner, covered in dust. It contained some of my old belongings, including a broken old Bluetooth headset case. After I died, Grandma collected many of the things she thought were still useful, and this box was among them. I focused my consciousness and tried to recall that old Bluetooth headset case. I remembered that once, when I was shopping with Scarlett, she saw this headset case and said with a smile that the style was nice, and asked me where I bought it. This connection was weak, but perhaps it was the only physical object that could be established that was unrelated to me, but could be linked to Scarlett and that time 3 years ago. Would Ryan's men come to search again? If they came again, would they notice this inconspicuous box? Waiting was agonizing. Grandma's illness kept recurring. Although Scarlett did not come in person again, the tonics she sent from time to time appeared at the door, each time causing Grandma, whose spirits had stabilized slightly, to fall into terror again. I itched with hatred, but there was nothing I could do. A turning point occurred on a rainy night. Ryan came in person. He didn't carry an umbrella. His short black hair was wet with rain, and a few strands stuck to his forehead, adding to his coldness. He went straight into Grandma's room. Grandma had taken her medicine and was sleeping. He didn't wake her up, he just stood by the bed, silently watching the old woman's uneasy, furrowed brows and dry lips, even in her sleep. Rainwater dripped from his hair, forming a small puddle at his feet. His eyes were very complicated, with lingering hatred, stubborn suspicion, but also a hint of imperceptible wavering, which even he himself might not admit. Perhaps it was because Grandma's current state of being on the verge of death didn't seem like the close relative left behind by a traitor, who was living in peace and comfort. He stood there for a long time, then turned around and walked into my room again. This time, he didn't search roughly as before, but turned on the powerful flashlight he was carrying and scanned every corner of the room inch by inch, his gaze sharp as a hawk. My heart was in my throat. This might be the only chance. He checked the bookshelf, looked in the closet, and even felt the floor and wall cracks. Finally, his gaze fell on the old cardboard box in the corner. He walked over, squatted down, and opened the cardboard box. Inside were some old magazines, a few old notebooks that were no longer in use, and the dusty Bluetooth headset case. He picked up the headset case, weighed it in his hand, and then opened it. It was empty. The earphones had long since disappeared. He didn't seem to notice anything unusual, and prepared to throw the box back into the cardboard box. At the moment he released it, perhaps the rain made his hand a little slippery, or perhaps an inconspicuous burr on the edge of the box caught on his glove. The box fell to the ground, making a slight knocking sound, and a small sticker on the bottom, almost blended in with the background color, lifted a corner due to the vibration. Ryan's movements stopped. He picked up the box again, and carefully pried up the sticker with his fingernail. Beneath the sticker, incredibly small writing and a date were visible. The handwriting was mine. It was something I jotted down to remember the earphone charging cable model. And the date. It was the very day, 3 years ago, the mission was executed. My heart almost stopped. This was just a coincidence. A trivial coincidence. But that date, combined with this earphone case that was connected to Scarlett, might it form some kind of suggestion in Ryan's mind? Ryan stared at the writing and the date, his pupils slightly constricting. He remained squatting, a statue frozen in the dim rain-filled night and the beam of the flashlight. Rain hammered against the window panes, making urgent sounds. The expression on his face shifted unpredictably in the alternating light and shadow. Hatred, suspicion, scrutiny, and that trace of memory that was being forcibly suppressed, of Scarlett being near the command center on the day of the mission, and now this old object connected to Scarlett bearing a crucial date. Various clues collided and intertwined in his mind. He abruptly stood up, no longer looking at the earphone case, but quickly walking to the window, pulling out his phone, and dialing a number. His voice sounded exceptionally cold and clear above the rain. "It's me. Pull up the surveillance again. All angles of the command center building's west side open-air platform, between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, 3 years ago on the day of the mission. Yes, all of it. Pay close attention to all personnel entering and exiting, especially the behavior of non-core access personnel." The rain fell all night long. Ryan left after that, without looking at Grandma again, without leaving a single word. But I knew something had changed. The order he gave was like a bomb dropped into deep water, the ripples silently spreading. Grandma was unconscious for 2 days, suffering from a high fever and the effects of medication. I stayed by her side, feeling her weak breathing, every second like being tormented on the edge of a knife. The town doctor came to see her several times, his tone grave, hinting at the need for better medical care, or the need to resolve the old woman's mental illness. Mental illness? My mental illness is Ryan's hatred and Scarlett's poison, and Grandma's mental illness is my death and her powerlessness to defend me. On the morning of the 3rd day, the rain stopped, and the sky was gray. Grandma finally woke up, her eyes still vacant, but at least the fever had broken. She was too weak to even sit up, just staring blankly at the ceiling. Just then, a car's brakes squealed outside the small courtyard. It wasn't the engine sound of Ryan's SUV. This sound was lighter, more familiar. My heart sank. Sure enough, a second later, Scarlett's white car stopped at the gate. She was dressed in black today, looking dignified and solemn, with a look of sorrowful grief on her face. She wasn't carrying anything, just a mobile phone. She pushed open the door and walked in gracefully, her gaze landing directly on the weak Grandma in bed. "Grandma," she said, her voice with a deliberately suppressed sadness. "Are you feeling better?" Grandma saw her, her body visibly stiffened, her cloudy eyes filled with fear, her lips trembling, but unable to make a sound. Scarlett walked to the bed, looking down at Grandma, the sorrowful expression on her face unchanged, but her eyes revealed a cold, almost cruel excitement. "I came to tell you some good news." She leaned down slightly, holding up the phone screen for Grandma to see. On the screen was a blurry photo, like a blown-up screenshot from surveillance footage. The photo showed a woman wearing clothes similar to what I wore back then. The background seemed to be an airport in some Southeast Asian country. The woman's profile resembled me somewhat, but it was very blurry, making it impossible to clearly see the specific features. "We've found Serena's whereabouts." Scarlett's voice was with a hypocritical sigh. As Ryan suspected, she used a fake identity and hid abroad for 3 years. "Look, this is the image of her taken at Bangkok airport. She seems to be doing well." "No. Not Serena." Grandma struggled, weakly refuting, tears streaming down her face. "Why not?" Scarlett's tone was firm, with an undeniable heartache. "The technical department has already made a preliminary comparison, and it's a high match. Grandma, do you want to keep deceiving yourself? She abandoned you long ago. She took the blood money and is living a carefree life abroad, leaving you alone here to suffer, and to bear the blame for her." She watched Grandma close her eyes in pain, her breathing rapid, the malicious smile at the corner of her mouth almost impossible to hide. She leaned close to Grandma's ear and said, word by word, in a soft voice that only Grandma and I could barely hear. Old thing, see, even God doesn't help your daughter. She's a traitor, a damned bitch who deserves to die. You protect her? Just wait and see her get caught, shot, and her body left unburied. Then, I'll see who's left to send you off when you die. Grandma's eyes suddenly widened, her pupils dilated, her body convulsing violently. Grandma. I rushed over, my soul scattered in fright. Scarlett was startled by Grandma's sudden violent reaction, instinctively taking a step back, a trace of panic flashing across her face, but she quickly regained that sorrowful expression, even feigning an attempt to comfort. Grandma, don't get excited. Calm down. Get out. Get out. Grandma screamed with the last of her strength. Then her eyes rolled back, and she completely fainted, her breathing so weak that it was almost imperceptible. Ungrateful. Scarlett cursed under her breath, adjusted her expression, and was about to leave. The courtyard door was violently kicked open from the outside. Ryan rushed in like a black whirlwind. His face was ashen, his eyes bloodshot, and he exuded a terrifying ferocity. The first thing he saw was Grandma, lying unconscious on the bed, her life hanging by a thread. Then his gaze shot like an arrow at Scarlett standing by the bed, and the phone she hadn't had time to put away. What did you do to her? Ryan's voice sounded squeezed out from between his teeth, with suppressed anger to the extreme. Scarlett was so frightened by him that she shivered, and almost dropped her phone. She quickly put on that aggrieved and worried expression, her eyes brimming with tears. Ryan, I just wanted to tell Grandma that we might have found a lead on Serena. I wanted her to be mentally prepared. I didn't expect her reaction to be so strong. Lead. Ryan stepped forward and snatched the phone from her, staring at the blurry airport photo on the screen, his eyes as cold as knives. Bangkok Airport? Highly matched. He suddenly looked up, staring intently at Scarlett, his gaze so sharp that it seemed to peel away her flesh, looking straight into her soul. Who provided this lead? Which expert in the technical department did the comparison? Why don't I know anything about it? Scarlett's face paled at his question, her eyes flickering, stammering. It's a preliminary analysis that the intelligence team just sent over. It might not have reached you yet. Preliminary analysis? Ryan laughed coldly, the laughter filled with Taltanuyi, and a kind of violence of being fooled. Scarlett, when did you have the authority to directly access and disseminate unverified preliminary analysis? And it was to an elderly woman who was seriously ill. He held the phone, almost touching Scarlett's face, his voice suddenly raised. This picture. It's so blurred that you can't even tell if it's a man or a woman. You tell me it's a high match? Do you think I'm a fool? Say it. What are you trying to do? Scarlett trembled all over when he roared, tears instantly falling, crying like a pear blossom in the rain. Ryan, you misunderstood me. I just don't want Grandma to be kept in the dark. I want her to face reality. I was doing it out of kindness. Kindness? Ryan looked at her pitiful appearance, the disgust and suspicion in his eyes almost overflowing. Your kindness is to keep running over to stimulate her, until you force her to her death? He no longer looked at her, suddenly turned around and shouted outside. Someone! Send Grandma to the city hospital. Immediately, now! His men immediately rushed in, carefully lifting the unconscious Grandma onto a stretcher. Ryan didn't even look at Scarlett, who had collapsed to the ground, crying nonstop. He gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles turning white from the force. He looked down at the blurry photo on the screen, then looked up at the gray sky outside the window, his chest rising and falling sharply. It wasn't just anger. It was a shock after his beliefs were strongly impacted, an outrage at being possibly fooled by the person he trusted the most, and even a panic at vaguely realizing that he might have made an irreversible mistake. All his previous hatred, all his investigations, were based on the premise that Serena defected. But what if that very foundation was a carefully constructed lie? What if Serena really died? What if she wasn't a traitor? Then everything he did to Grandma. His hatred for that dead person. Ryan suddenly closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his eyes were bloodshot with determination. He ignored the sobbing Scarlett and strode out, following the stretcher. I knew he was going to pull up the surveillance footage. Outside the intensive care unit of the city hospital, the atmosphere was so heavy it could drip water. Grandma was sent inside, various instruments maintaining her weak vital signs. The doctor's words were still ringing in my ears. The old woman was already old and weak, plus she had been worried and depressed for a long time, and was now severely stimulated, causing acute heart failure and insufficient blood supply to the brain. The situation was very unoptimistic. Whether she could make it through the night depended on tonight. Ryan stood outside the cold glass window, looking at Grandma inside, filled with tubes, from a distance. His back was straight, like a tight spear, but his clenched fists and the veins popping out on the back of his hands revealed the raging storm in his heart. He didn't turn his head to look at Scarlett, who was standing not far behind him, still sobbing softly, trying to explain. All his attention seemed to be focused on Grandma, and seemed to penetrate Grandma, seeing something else. I floated beside Grandma's hospital bed, feeling her life candle flickering, my heart aching with numbness. Then I floated to Ryan's side, looking at the subtle, almost imperceptible tremors on his cold, hard profile. He was afraid. Not afraid of the trouble that Grandma's death might bring, but afraid of a possibility that he dared not confirm. At this moment, one of his trusted subordinates came quickly, holding a tablet computer in his hand, his face exceptionally serious. He glanced at Scarlett beside him, looking hesitant. "Speak." Ryan's voice was hoarse and low, filled with undeniable command. His subordinate didn't hesitate, handing him the tablet. "Boss, the surveillance footage from the west platform of headquarters, taken at 2:37 p.m. on the day of the mission, has been restored and zoomed in. Look at this angle." A video with greatly improved clarity was playing on the tablet. In the frame, a figure in the corner of the open-air platform, wearing auxiliary logistics personnel clothing. It was Scarlett. Her back was to the camera, but her movements were clearly visible. She was slightly turned, quickly stuffing a small, dark object, resembling a USB drive, into the soil of a flower pot on the edge of the platform. After doing all this, she nervously looked around. The time, only a few minutes apart from when I remembered encountering her. Immediately after, less than 2 minutes later, another figure appeared at the edge of the screen. It was me. I walked towards the platform, seemingly wanting to get some air, and then met Scarlett, who was walking from that direction. The surveillance clearly captured the moment Scarlett saw me, a flash of obvious panic on her face, her hand subconsciously wiping behind her back, before forcing a smile and talking to me. Communication records and encrypted channel login logs have been synchronized and verified. The subordinate continued his report, his voice suppressing shock. At 2:39 p.m., approximately 1 minute after Miss Scarlett left the platform, there was an extremely brief probing login signal from an unknown device, attempting to simulate the characteristics of Comrade Serena's encrypted channel. The source was traced through complex jumps, ultimately vaguely located to the area near the platform, and the formal large-scale data leak occurred at 3:05 p.m., through a more sophisticated disguise method, but the trace of the initial probe highly coincides with the time and location of the platform. The subordinate paused, adding the most crucial sentence. The technical department reanalyzed the evidence previously identified as a leak from Comrade Serena's channel, and discovered subtle anomalies in the data packet structure, more like. It was carefully fabricated and framed. The tablet slipped from Ryan's hand, crashing to the ground, the screen instantly shattering, like the belief that had suddenly collapsed within him. He turned around abruptly, his bloodshot eyes like those of a dying beast, fixed on Scarlett, whose face was deathly pale and who had even forgotten to cry. What? What was that? His voice was so hoarse it was barely audible, every word carrying the scent of blood. What did you stuff into the flower pot? And no. It's not like that, Ryan, let me explain. Scarlett retreated in terror, incoherently. It was a small trinket I dropped. Yes, a trinket. A trinket? Ryan approached her step by step, the terrifying pressure radiating from him causing the temperature of the entire corridor to plummet several degrees. Needed to be so secretive? Needed you to be so flustered when you saw Serena? Needed to coincide with the time and place of the probing leak signal. He suddenly lunged, grabbing Scarlett by the neck and slamming her hard against the cold wall. The huge crash echoed in the empty corridor. "Speak," he roared, veins throbbing on his forehead, the madness and pain in his eyes almost devouring Scarlett. "Where is Serena? What did you do to her?" Scarlett's eyes rolled back from being strangled. The fear of death completely breaking her, she screamed. "She's dead. She's been dead for a long time." Time seemed to freeze at this moment. Ryan's hand, strangling her, trembled violently, but the force unconsciously loosened slightly. "You. What did you say?" His voice was light as a whisper, but carried the premonition of destruction. "Ha ha." Scarlett, finally able to breathe, laughed maniacally as if she had given up all hope, her smile twisted and malicious. "She's dead. She died 3 years ago. I did it. Who told her to be nosy? Who told her to run into me, Anne? And the people on that side. She actually wanted to report it to you secretly." My soul trembled violently, fragments of forgotten, painful memories flooding in. The night before the mission, I inadvertently ran into Scarlett outside headquarters, talking in hushed tones with an unidentified man, her demeanor intimate and suspicious. I was suspicious at the time and wanted to report it immediately, but I didn't have any solid evidence. I just wanted to find a chance to remind Ryan to be careful. Unexpectedly, she noticed it. "So you killed her?" Ryan's voice was as cold as 10,000 years of ice, the hand strangling Scarlett's neck tightening again. "Kill her? That was too good for her." Scarlett's eyes were venomous, filled with a retaliatory pleasure. "I knocked her unconscious and took her away. I found someone and locked her up. Tortured her for 7 days and 7 nights. Ha ha ha. You have no idea how miserable she looked at the time. She cried and begged me to let her go, begged me to see her grandmother one last time. But how could I possibly let her go?" With each sentence she spoke, Ryan's face paled a little more, his body trembling even more violently. "Isn't she noble? Isn't she capable? Doesn't she fight alongside you?" Scarlett laughed madly, tears streaming down her face mixed with a twisted smile. "I'm going to ruin her. I made her beg for mercy like a dog on the ground. In the end, I threw her away like trash, in the wasteland behind the abandoned chemical factory in the west of the city. I'm afraid now, the wild dogs have already gnawed her bones clean. Ha ha." Ryan abruptly released Scarlett, staggering backwards and crashing into the wall behind him, barely managing not to fall. He hunched over, grabbing his hair with both hands, as if unable to breathe, the immense pain almost tearing him apart. He was wrong. How incredibly wrong he was. The traitor he had hated for 3 years, the woman he wished he could tear into pieces, was brutally murdered 3 years ago by the sister he had treated with trust, perhaps even with a hint of affection. No remains left. And he, after her death, attacked her only living relative with the most vicious words, driving her elderly grandmother to the brink time and time again. He even after her death, stubbornly hated her, refusing to give her even a shred of innocence. A mouthful of bright red blood suddenly spurted from Ryan's mouth, splattering on the pure white wall, shockingly. He slid slowly down the wall, curled up, and let out a suppressed, desperate wail. And I, floating in the air, listening to Scarlett's insane and detailed narrative, feeling Ryan's earth-shattering pain, my soul seemed to be crushed inch by inch. That mouthful of blood from Ryan seemed to vomit out all his self-righteousness and blind hatred. He didn't stay in the hospital for long. His subordinates forcibly helped him up, but he pushed away their support, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth fiercely with the back of his hand. When he raised his head again, all the pain and collapse on his face were replaced by an extreme coldness. In those scarlet eyes, only the dark fire of destroying everything remained. He didn't even look at Scarlett, who was sprawled on the ground, crying and laughing, as if she was just a pile of disgusting trash. He turned to his subordinates and commanded in a hoarse but exceptionally clear voice, "Take her into custody, don't let her die." 2 subordinates immediately stepped forward, dragging the near-insane Scarlett away without any pity. Ryan then turned and strode out of the hospital. His back was still straight, but it was as if all warmth had been drawn from him, leaving only an empty shell existing for revenge. I knew he was going to confirm my death, and to begin his revenge. I didn't follow Scarlett, I followed Ryan. I wanted to know where he was going, to see with my own eyes how he would fulfill his vow of executing justice on the spot. Only the target had changed. He used all the power and resources he could, even at the risk of encroaching on some gray areas. Based on Scarlett's vague description of the disposal site, the wasteland behind the abandoned chemical factory in the west of the city, he took people and combed the area from top to bottom. It was a barren, dirty place, too desolate even for stray dogs. The air was filled with the pungent smell of chemical waste. I floated in the air, watching them struggling through the waist-high weeds and piles of garbage. Ryan personally got involved, abandoning all his cleanliness and dignity, searching with his bare hands, his fingernails filled with mud, his expensive clothes torn, but he didn't care. His eyes were like searchlights, not missing any suspicious traces. Time passed little by little, from day to night, and back to dawn. Hope seemed to be dwindling. Scarlett was right, 3 years had passed, rain had washed over it, animals had scavenged, perhaps nothing would be left. Just when everyone was about to give up, a young team member found a small piece of metal, severely oxidized and discolored, half covered by rubble, deep in a dry ditch almost completely covered by vegetation. It was a corner of an identity tag. A Jiang character was vaguely engraved on it. It was my identity tag. We wore these specially made metal identity tags when carrying out important tasks. Ryan almost pounced on it. He carefully cleared away the rubble, holding the small fragment of metal, bearing the last traces of me, in the palm of his hand. His hand trembled violently. Then, not far from where the identity tag was found, under some relatively soft soil, they used professional tools to carefully excavate a skeleton that was almost completely bleached white. The bones were twisted and curled up, presenting an extremely painful posture. The ribs, arm bones, and leg bones had obvious, unnatural fracture marks in many places, and even the skull had clear impact cracks. The forensic examiner gave a preliminary assessment at the scene, his voice heavy. Female, between 25 and 30 years old. Estimated time of death is 3 years ago. Suffered prolonged, inhumane abuse before death. Multiple old fractures, soft tissue. Cannot be determined. The fatal injury may be organ failure caused by multiple severe injuries. Even though he already knew the ending from Scarlett, Ryan still couldn't bear it when he saw the skeleton silently recounting the horrific pain. He knelt beside the skeleton, reached out his hand, as if wanting to touch it, but then recoiled sharply as if burned. He lowered his head, his shoulders heaving violently, but he didn't make a sound. Only the suppressed, guttural sobbing that overflowed from the depths of his throat proved that he was still alive. The sunlight shone blindingly on the white bones and his hunched back, forming an extremely cruel picture. He found me, in the way he least wanted to see. He carefully collected the skeleton, along with the fragment of the identity tag, took it back to the morgue at the base, and arranged for the most detailed autopsy, to confirm every detail and record all of Scarlett's crimes. Then his revenge began. Scarlett was locked in a dark, windowless underground interrogation room. At first, she clung to hope, crying that she was forced, that she was temporarily confused because she loved Ryan and was jealous of me. Ryan didn't go to see her. He merely issued a series of cold orders. He paid them back in their own coin. He found those hooligans and scumbags who assisted Scarlett in kidnapping and torturing me back then. He dealt with them ruthlessly, making them taste all the pain they had inflicted upon me before they died. Then it was Scarlett's turn. He cut off all her contact with the outside world, and imprisoned her in a dark and sunless environment. He didn't use cruel physical torture on her. That would be too easy for her. He had people shine high-intensity lights on her at irregular intervals every day, disturb her with noise, and prevent her from sleeping, destroying her spirit. He hired a psychologist to repeat her crimes in her ear over and over again, describing the tragic state I was in before I died, describing the torment Grandma suffered as a result, and completely crushing the last bit of pretense and hope in her heart. He would occasionally watch her through the surveillance cameras, watching her go from her initial screams and defenses, to later fearful pleas, to mental disorientation, rambling nonsense, and finally, like a pile of mud, curled up in the corner, her eyes empty, repeatedly muttering, "I was wrong. Let me go. I was wrong. Let me go." But that wasn't enough. On the verge of her complete mental breakdown, Ryan finally met with her once. He stood outside the cell, separated by special glass, coldly watching the gaunt, barely human woman inside. Scarlett. His voice was calm and without emotion, yet more terrifying than any roar. Didn't you like throwing people into the wilderness? Scarlett seemed to be triggered by a switch, suddenly raised her head, and looked at him in horror. Ryan curled the corner of his mouth into a cold and cruel arc. I've found you a good place. On the northwest border, there is a no-man's land called Burial of the Gods. There is no water, no food, only quicksand, scorpions, and eternal wind and sand. You will be thrown there, to live or die on your own. He paused and added, just like Serena back then. However, you are luckier than her. At least I'll give you the chance to have a whole corpse, if you can survive until you become a dried-up corpse. Scarlett let out an extremely shrill scream, frantically beating against the glass, begging for mercy with tears streaming down her face. Ryan just watched expressionlessly, his eyes without a trace of fluctuation, as if watching a drama that had nothing to do with him. Soon, Scarlett was secretly escorted away, sent to that aptly named land of death. I knew she wouldn't live long. In that desperate situation, waiting for her was only despair more painful than death and slow annihilation. Ryan took revenge for me in the most direct and cruel way. He stood in the empty interrogation room, silent all around. He had his revenge, but there was no joy on his face, only a deathly gray pallor. He got rid of the person who killed me and cleared my name. But then what? I'm dead and never coming back. Grandma is still lying in the hospital, her life hanging in the balance. The news of Scarlett being sent to the Burial of the Gods, to fend for herself was like a breeze, not causing any public waves, but bringing silent deterrence in certain circles. Ryan used the most ruthless means to declare that some bottom lines cannot be touched. My remains underwent a detailed autopsy, confirming my identity and cause of death. Every wound was recorded, and became ironclad evidence of Scarlett's crimes. Ryan personally cremated my remains, placing them in an ancient and elegant urn. He didn't bury them immediately, but took the urn back to his residence and placed it in the most conspicuous place in his study, as if a silent repentance and accompaniment. Then he devoted all his energy to the hospital. Grandma struggled in the intensive care unit for 3 days before finally surviving the most dangerous period, and being transferred to a regular ward. But her body was completely broken, her organs were failing, and her consciousness was sometimes clear and sometimes muddled. Most of the time, she was unconscious, and when she occasionally woke up, her eyes were also blank, and she couldn't recognize people. Ryan almost lived in the hospital. He turned down all work and stayed by Grandma's bedside every step of the way. He personally wiped Grandma down, fed her medicine, and dealt with her excrement, his movements going from the initial clumsy to later skillful and meticulous. He was no longer as cold and hard as before, and facing the unconscious Grandma, he would speak in an extremely low and hoarse voice, over and over again. Grandma, it's Ryan. It's getting cold. I've added a blanket for you. The doctor said your indicators are a little better today. Serena. She wasn't a traitor. The person who harmed her has paid the price. I'm sorry. He said the last 3 words with extreme difficulty, with an unspeakable heaviness. Sometimes, Grandma would briefly wake up for a moment. Her cloudy eyes looked at Ryan, without the previous fear, only a deep, as if seeing through everything, compassion. She would extend her withered hand, gently pat the back of his hand, and say vaguely, "Don't blame you." Serena's fate was bitter. You must be well. Whenever this happened, Ryan would suddenly lower his head, his shoulders trembling slightly, tightly holding Grandma's hand, as if grasping at the last straw. I floated in the hospital room, watching all of this. The hatred in my heart gradually faded after seeing his sincere repentance and his meticulous care for Grandma. All that was left was endless bitterness and sorrow. He was atoning, making up for the harm he had caused to me and Grandma, by taking care of Grandma. But some harm cannot be compensated. Grandma's body was weakening day by day, like a candle in the wind. The doctor privately told Ryan that the old woman didn't have much time left, and was only supported by a will. I know that Grandma's will is to not worry about me and perhaps also worried about this young man who suddenly woke up but was trapped in pain and unable to extricate himself. On a cold moonlit night, Grandma's spirits suddenly improved, and her eyes were much clearer. She asked Ryan to help her sit up and look at the moon outside the window. Ryan, Her voice was weak but clear. Serena loved such a moon when she was a child. She said that looking at the moon makes your heart brighter. Ryan's eyes were red. He held her hand tightly. His Adam's apple moved, unable to speak. She's a silly child. Her heart is filled with you, with responsibility, with me, this useless old woman. But she didn't fill it with herself. Grandma sighed and looked far away. When she left, she must have been very painful and scared. But she definitely didn't regret meeting you. Ryan's tears finally couldn't stop falling, big drops falling down. I'm going to see Serena. A relieved smile appeared on Grandma's face. She held Ryan's hand back, using her last strength, and told him word by word. You must live well. For Serena, see the scenery she didn't see. Live well. Her hand slowly slipped down. On the cardiac monitor, it drew a cold, straight line. Grandma is gone. She left this world peacefully, with thoughts of me and the last entrustment to Ryan. Grandma. Ryan let out a suppressed wail, knelt in front of the bed, sobbing. I floated in the air, looking at Grandma's peaceful face. My soul seemed to leave with her. In this world, my last worry broken. After dealing with Grandma's funeral and burying her, and my urn side by side in a quiet cemetery, Ryan seemed to be completely emptied. He returned to that cold and empty residence where he was alone. My urn was still in the study, and next to it was a portrait of Grandma. He no longer went out, answered the phone, or saw anyone. He often sat alone in the study, facing the urn and photos, sitting for a whole day. His eyes were empty, without any light. He lost weight rapidly, became gaunt and emaciated, like a walking skeleton. I know he doesn't want to live anymore. Grandma's death took away his last responsibility and attachment. The truth of my death, like a mountain, overwhelmed all his vitality. Guilt, pain, despair. Like poison, eroding his soul day and night. Late one night, he carefully cleaned the entire house, wiping my urn and Grandma's photos spotless. Then he put on a sharp uniform, the one he used to wear when fighting alongside me. He sat at his desk, took out his gun and slowly and solemnly loaded it. The cold metal shone with a ghostly light in the moonlight. He took one last look at my urn, his eyes filled with thick, unresolved nostalgia, pain and relief. Serena. He whispered my name, his voice hoarse and broken. I'm sorry. I'm coming to find you. Wait for me. He raised the gun and aimed it at his temple. No, Ryan. Don't. I let out a heartbreaking cry, rushing towards him madly, wanting to stop him. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, my soul burst out with unprecedented power, briefly interfering with the surrounding energy field. A book on the desk fell to the ground with a bang. This subtle sound made Ryan pause. And in that instant, I seemed to break through some kind of barrier. My voice, my image, like a reflection in the water, appeared blurry and anxious in front of him. Ryan, don't die. I cried out, my soul trembling. Please, live on for me, live for us, and take a good look at this world. Live well. Ryan's eyes widened suddenly, looking in disbelief at my blurred illusion. The gun in his hand fell to the ground with a clatter. Serena? He reached out a trembling hand, wanting to touch me, but his fingertips passed through my ethereal form. It's me. My image began to flicker, as if it would dissipate at any moment. Promise me. Live on, please. I used the last of my strength to convey my plea. Ryan looked at my remaining wisp of a soul about to vanish, at the book and gun dropped on the ground, and then at the kind eyes in Grandma's photo, filled with a silent request. The deathly stillness in his eyes was finally replaced by a tremendous tremor mixed with pain. He clutched his head suddenly, letting out a whimper like a trapped beast. Finally, he slowly raised his head, looking at the place where I had disappeared, tears streaming down his face, but using all his strength to promise in a hoarse, solemn voice. Okay, I promise you. I will live on. Ryan did not die. He was unconscious for 3 days, found by his subordinates who came to visit and sent to the hospital. When he woke up, he was like a different person. He was still silent, and deep pain was still hidden in his eyes, but he no longer sought death. He resigned from his original position, and chose a relatively easy clerical job. He ate regularly, kept a regular schedule, and even started exercising. Every year during Qingming Festival, the anniversary of my death, and the anniversary of Grandma's death, he would unfailingly come to the tomb, lay down 2 bunches of white chrysanthemums, and sit quietly for the whole day, talking about what he had seen and done that year. He went to many places and saw many landscapes that Grandma and I had never seen. Snowy mountains, the sea, deserts, rainforests. He recorded them with his camera, developed the photos, and burned them for us at the tomb. He fulfilled his promise to me, living well. However, there was no longer any true joy in his eyes. That tragedy had left an eternal mark on him. My death and Grandma's death had become unhealable wounds in his life, accompanying his every breath. Years passed, decades flew by in the blink of an eye. Ryan grew old, his hair turned white, and his back was no longer straight. But he still insisted on visiting us every year, still living alone. One warm spring afternoon, he sat as usual in front of Grandma's and my tomb, watching the children playing in the distance, his face with a peaceful release. He slowly closed his eyes, leaning against the tombstone, as if he had fallen asleep. The sunlight shone through the gaps in the leaves, falling on his peaceful face and on the 2 tombstones side by side. This time he did not wake up again. The doctor diagnosed natural aging, death without illness. At his funeral, when people sorted through his belongings, they found that he had already prepared a tomb for himself, right next to Grandma and me. In his hand, he tightly clutched a yellowed photo. It was a group photo of Jay and some other brothers, arms around each other, smiling, from many years ago, after a mission. In the photo, I was smiling brightly, my eyes shining. He had finally come to join us. After living a long and lonely life in the way he had promised, he finally unloaded all the pain and guilt, and went to this reunion that was decades overdue. My soul felt a long-lost peace on that day, as if the persistent obsession that had been lingering was finally dissipated with his arrival. The sun was just right, the breeze gentle. In the cemetery, 3 tombstones stood quietly together, as if telling a long and sad story of love and hate, misunderstanding and forgiveness, sacrifice and waiting.